Good evening, 49er faithful. Welcome to another episode of Between Two Beards. Always excited to have you here on Wednesday nights. I'm Rob Shue, your host. That's my co-host on Between Two Beards, Randon McMahon. Randon, how are things going for you after a tumultuous week for the San Francisco 49ers, sir?
Man, it was a week for me too, because we get there. Me and my brother go to the local pub to go watch all the games. The girl that he's seen is a Giants fan, so we're there for the morning games too, and then we're just gonna have a whole day of football. Well, all of a sudden, I'm not feeling very well. I had to leave right before the Niners game, so I didn't even see the Niners game live. And then I come home, pass out. I watched it on replay, watched all the highlights and the vibe. But my brother on the way home, as I'm not feeling good, is like, by the way, do you know Trey Lance broke his ankle, right?
Oh.
I was like, you son of a bee. You want to kick me while I'm down? And then after that, it was, just a lot of back and forth contemplation, a lot of want to place blame. And, we won, so you can't be too sad that this is our first win Wednesday. And, man,
how messed up is that, bro? We got ourselves a win Wednesday, but it's someone's shit all over it because Lance is out. We got what we asked for. Careful what you wish for, I think is the key takeaway there.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't hit it that I wanted Trey Lance to succeed. I want him to be great, and I wanted the win Wednesday to be with him.
Yep.
And I was like, it's weird how thought process go into your head. Do I even want to see the season now that Trey Lance isn't the quarterback? And you're like, of course I will, because every Sunday I'll watch the games. But it's like, I was so hyped. I have him on 3 fantasy leagues, so I had to find 3 quarterbacks this week.
Oh,
it was just a lot. Going back and forth, placing blame, being happy for the win, outlook of the season, and then obviously we'll get into all those topics about the reports that came out, Kyle Shanahan squashing that, all that stuff, but. Man, yeah, it was a pretty tumultuous week. What about you?
Very tumultuous. I mean, I tried to hold those two things at once, being happy for the 49ers win and being incredibly saddened because of what happened to Trey Lance. And again, I share your sentiment of wishing him the utmost success, thought he was going to be the starter throughout the season, thought it was going to be a season of progression for him. Instead, it's another season wherein he has to take a back seat and wait for that opportunity once again. And it confounds what's going to happen next offseason. That's the most perplexing thing to me is where the 49ers find themselves at the end of this year. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We're certainly going to be talking about the quarterback tonight. There's a good energy in the chat, but it's mainly food focused. I've got to say that early on in the chat today, we had a couple of people coming in to say what's up. The Oakdale 49ers show, Raphael 562 Niners, Alan Elizer, all coming in. We got a question from Alan we'll get to in just a moment. Then Ben Dover, one of the classic names out there as far as handles go, comes in and asks what's better, pork fried rice or chicken fried rice? It started a whole debate about fried rice in the chat. To me, there's just no question. It's pork fried rice all day, every day. So it should have been settled right off of the bat. But I get it. People have their own opinions about it, Randy. Do you sway one way or the other before we get into Niners content?
Chicken fried rice is just like the training wheels of fried rice. And then when you start branching out to bigger and better things, you understand.
Yes. You have to expose yourself to more and more dishes out there. Ben Dover is absolutely elated that we've brought up the fried rice debate here. Papa Phil coming in to say, what up, everybody? Okay, for those of you that are here in the chat, as always, if you enjoy the content, if you like the channel, hit that like button for us and subscribe here on the channel. Randon's information is down below so that you can follow him and subscribe as well. A little bit of news to break off to start this thing with some roster moves, Randon. We've got the signing of Marlon Mack to the 53-man roster, obviously in correlation with TDP having that high ankle sprain, although he's not been put on IR yet. Neither he nor who else had a 4 to 6 week injury. Why is it escaping me right now? Anyway, Ty Davis Price is not going to be thrown on IR because this year it's only 8 players that can be tagged to IR and come back. So even though he will be out, probably that 4-week period isn't on IR right now. 49ers did add quarterback Kurt Benkert to the practice squad, and Kerry Vincent Jr. was released from the practice squad to make room. signed Tevin Coleman to the practice squad, an old familiar name. Before we move off of this, the only one I really want your opinion on, I'm interested to know your thoughts on Marlon Mack as well. But Tevin Coleman revisiting the team, are you excited about that or indifferent?
Why do we keep signing old players that don't have any life left in their game? Like, can we move on? Because
they know the system. They know the system.
Good. Sign a guy to the practice squad and he can learn the system.
Right.
What did I say? There was like 30 running backs that had over 1,000 yards last season. Like, come on. In NCAA, like, let's get a young guy and have him like learn the system, bring him in. Like, literally, Tevin Coleman is on the better half of agent years old. And like, what are we really accomplishing at this point? Like, I guess we'll get into the trust factor for Shanahan, but I think it's pure poppycock.
I see Tevin Coleman as like a trusted agent, as Jim Harbaugh used to say, that you bring him into the building. He's got the right type of mentality, right attitude. He was a part of that 2019 squad. But if he's promoted to the 53-man roster and he's carrying the ball again, I'm not terribly excited about that, because I agree with you. From a talent standpoint, there are better options out there. Let's transition right into the meat of the show here, and that's talking about Trey Lance being out for the season. It was officially announced today. Kyle Shanahan was asked in the presser. There has been some mention of Trey Lance recovery time being more in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 weeks, with 16 weeks remaining in the season. Is it possible that he comes back in time for the end of the season, or a possible playoff push if that does happen? Kyle Shanahan pretty definitively said, no, he will be out for the year. The reporter clarified, do you mean the year, meaning end of December, or the season? Kyle Shanahan clarified he meant the season. Anytime he says the year, that means the season, because that's the only calendar he's operating by, is the NFL one. So the idea of Trey being ready again at some point was floated around. Obviously, that's what Shanahan is responding to. Now he's definitively said he won't return. My question for you, Randon, is that a good thing? Would you have rather, if Trey were recovered toward the end of the season, that he be reinstalled as the starting quarterback in a hypothetical where the 49ers are headed towards the playoffs?
So, I mean, you're looking at it this way. One, we don't know if the Niners are going to make the playoffs. We assume that based on our team, but we don't know. Like, other injuries, just extension from other teams. Maybe the team doesn't play as well as we think they do. Like, if a team's not in a playoff contention, like, why wouldn't you start Trey Lance? Like, why are you furthering his delay of his development? And now, to your question, if they are, why wouldn't you put Trey Lance in for, like, if it's 10 to 12 weeks, we have 16 weeks left in the season. Like, that's 4 weeks that he could come back, play, get his feet wet, and be ready for the playoffs. If you thought he was supposed to be the number one quarterback going into the season, obviously you signed Jimmy Garoppolo, you still named Trey Lance the number one quarterback. Why wouldn't you put your number one quarterback back in the game? It makes no sense. Like any other team, Aaron Rodgers goes out, Mahomes goes out, Josh Allen goes out, and the backup gets them to a playoff position, and they're coming back, week 16, week 15. Do you think they're playing? Yeah, they are.
No, absolutely.
And I'm not saying that Lance is not on their level. I'm just saying that he had the starter job. Like, you would put your starter back in.
I'm in complete alignment that if the Niners were out of the playoff push, it would be a no-brainer what you would do. You would need to give Trey Lance that experience as you intended to from the outset of the season. If we were in the playoffs at that point, and we're talking about putting Lance back in at that stage, I'm not entirely sure that I would. It would be dependent upon how Jimmy Garoppolo is playing at that time. But the goal for this season was to allow Trey Lance to progress as a passer during the regular season. It's my interpretation Shanahan was leaning on Trey's legs early with the intention of pivoting as he grew, and that growth happening over the season such that he would be a better prepared passer going into the playoffs and potentially more dangerous than Jimmy Garoppolo at that stage. Now that Trey doesn't have the advantage of reps and would simultaneously be recovering from an injury at that point, I kind of look at it as just setting him up to further fail. And we'll touch on this later as to mismanagement or not mismanagement of Trey Lance. But to me, again, coming back in from the injury where he hasn't gotten the reps to progress, it would seem like a potentially bad setup for Trey Lance to put him back in. I actually appreciate Shanahan shutting it down for the year, gives Trey Lance another offseason to work on his throwing motion and come back fresh next year.
Yeah, but then how much trust is there? There's not that much trust already. Like, I understand, like, Like,
It's a terrible situation.
What if Jimmy Garoppolo is lighting the world on fire, which I don't foresee happening, but if he's lighting the world on fire, he's on pace for 4,500 yards, 30 plus touchdowns, and he's just slinging it left and right. Sure, keep him in, because at that point, he's showing you that he's progressing as a quarterback and he can maybe have better success in the playoffs. But, you also have all these other scenarios. What if the Niners just steamroll everybody and we clinch with 3 weeks to go? Would you not put Trey Lance in to see what he can do in those 3 weeks or 2 weeks?
I would
see if maybe he has the progression to play. Does that instigate a quarterback controversy? What if Jimmy Garoppolo gets injured in weeks 12 through 16 or 18, and then you're shutting him down no matter what? Like, at that point, I think most fans would understand if he is coming back. Let's just say his hypothetical returns week 14.
Yeah.
Or week 16, whatever you want to say. And Jimmy Garoppolo's cruising. What if Jimmy gets injured in those last 2 weeks? You're going to go to Nate. You're going to go to, I was going to say Nate Sutton. You're going to go to Purdy, a rookie that's never played a game for the playoffs? Like, to automatically just shut him down for the season, I think is asinine. Like, there's so many other things that can go on that may allow Trey Lance to play, whether it be the bad season or getting him reps or Jimmy G injury, that just to shut him down no matter what, I think is a bad move.
I have to agree with that, but let me throw this out there as a potential of what Shanahan is doing here. He's squashing the media continuing to bring it up, but nothing is preventing him from walking that back and changing his mind, right? He's not prevented from doing that down the road, and that's why I'm supportive of the language he used today, because it ends the discussion.
Maybe he's just doing it for his sanity, that he's not getting asked this every week. Yeah.
Right. And for Trey's sanity in that, right? If Trey's coming back, there are plenty of situations, as you just pointed out, where the Niners are out of it and it's worth putting in Trey Lance at that point, or they've clinched it and you put Trey Lance in to see if he is recovered, to see if he can take that step forward, because it would be ideal to have him get some experience at the end of the year and show us what he can do, so that it's not a complete unknown going into next year. That's the toughest part for me, is not getting any additional information going into next season, where the 49ers can't tag Jimmy Garoppolo. So if he does well, they're going to be in a bidding war for his services. That, takes out of it the whole conundrum of, do you even want to bring Jimmy Garoppolo back? But it just becomes messy if we don't get any additional information on Trey Lance. Let's keep going on the quarterback conversation, because right now, it's pretty much what everyone wants to talk about. And let's shift it a little bit to talking about Coach Shanahan. Is Kyle Shanahan to blame on some level for the injury to Trey Lance? What's your opinion on that, Randon?
Can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay, because the video is frozen on my end, so I just want to make sure that you can still hear me. But
yeah, video's good on my end, and I can hear you. If anyone in the chat sees differently, shoot me a message there, but I think we're good. May just be on your end.
Okay, could you re-ask that question then? Because I
yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about Shanahan. We're talking about the injury to Trey Lance. Is Kyle Shanahan to blame for the injury to Trey Lance, in your opinion?
Yes, I think partially. I think partially it's the NFL, and that's always going to be a partial. Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt on a running play where he wasn't even touched, right? So like it happens in the NFL. But if you look at the usage for Trey Lance and runs up the middle, it was on a historic pace. Like, he was on pace for over 200 plus carries. That's a working 3-down running back in the NFL. Like, everybody was like, oh man, Derrick Henry, a 250-pound beast, is getting 300 carries. That's too much for him to stay healthy. And yet it's okay for Trey Lance to have over 200 plus carries, or on pace to 200 plus carries. It's just asinine for me. And like, it makes zero sense to me whatsoever why he would run that much. And everybody's like, oh, he's not ready to throw the football. Poppycock. Like, it literally, he was 70% in the Houston game. He was doing well in the preseason. He was a top 10 quarterback in the NFL for 3 quarters in the Chicago game before the monsoon happened, according to PFF. Like, let him throw the football. How is he going to get better at throwing the football if he doesn't throw the football?
I really agree with that last point, right? You do have to let him throw the football. I would contend that he has been throwing the football, just not as much as we may like. So I hold 2 things to be true. 1, no, Kyle is not to blame for the injury. The injury itself was a fluke. As Kyle talked about, if he had it to do over again, would he call a different play? Yes, absolutely. But that's hindsight being 2020. in speaking to this idea of how many carries Trey Lance had gotten, this is the tricky one for me, because I both believe that it was necessary to lean on Trey Lance's legs at the beginning of the season as he acclimated to becoming a better pocket passer. I think we can agree that regardless of where we find him to be, that he has some growth that he can take as a pocket passer in order to operate from within the pocket and operate Shanahan's system successfully. I will say, I don't believe Trey Lance was headed for 200 carries. I believe that the plan was to transition. And I have to quote from Jack Hammer, who astutely pointed out that if we simply extend the 2 games played for Trey Lance, as people are absolutely doing with the rushing totals, which does get him above 200 carries, then we would also say Trey would have thrown for a whopping 0 touchdowns on the year and 17 interceptions. And I don't think that was going to be the case.
I think that logic is flawed.
It is flawed. That's exactly my point, is that the logic is flawed in believing that you would continue with the same number of carries per game, that the sample size is too small to multiply it out.
Sorry. I think Jack Hammer's logic is flawed.
Sure. Bring it out.
Zero touchdowns and 17 interceptions are results based on the play on the field. The usage is dictated by Shanahan's guide. Like, you can't say, like,
in both cases, you're assuming it stays consistent.
No, but like, results are different. You can have different results with the same. You can have different results
absolutely.
with the same usage. Right?
Absolutely.
A couple of those plays get caught, you get touchdowns. Like, well, that would be different. Obviously, nobody is going to extrapolate Tua's results.
But let me throw this out there.
All 17 games.
The same is true with usage, right? If Seattle, if that game continues and Lance doesn't get hurt, he has 3 carries early, and everyone says, well, map that out. He was headed for at least 12 carries in that game. But if the Niners get up big in that game, as they end up doing, does Kyle Shanahan continue to lean on Trey Lance at that point? My contention is no. In Chicago, his carries were so high because it was a monsoon game, because they then fell down and he was concerned about winning the game. I believe that Niners will be up big on some opponents this year, and in those instances would not have expected Kyle Shanahan to run Trey Lance quite as much. So that is where I see the parallel in it not being reasonable to simply multiply out the results for either one of those, whether it's the usage or the results.
I just think that even in games that they're winning, like, he's still running 7-8 times a game, which is Josh Allen's most prolific season as a rusher. So, like, even then, like, even when we're winning, do you not, like, he was on pace for 4 or 5 carries in the first quarter. You're not putting teams away in the first quarter. He's going to be playing to win all the way through the third quarter, if not mid fourth quarter. Like, do you really think that maybe 1 or 2 carries here or there in certain games is really going to be enough to dictate the total carries? Like, that makes 0 sense to me. Yeah, sure. Okay, fine. He's not at 220 carries, but he's at 190. That's still way too much. That is still way too much. And even at the end of the season, if he turns into this gunslinger, do you still think he's not going to use the asset at 7 times or 6 times a game? Sure. Like, that's what you get him for. But at that point in the season, he's still putting his quarterback in harm's way more than not. And isn't the goal of this season to develop him? Like, why are you, like, this is my whole point of this. And I will get to this later with Kyle Shanahan, because I'm furious with him. I think he's partially to blame, because so far in the season, he's put his quarterback in harm's way more than I believe he should.
Sure. I can agree with that. And what I would say is that I am in alignment with Kyle Shanahan on the use of Trey Lance and his legs as a weapon. My contention with what had been done in usage so far was just a few carries here or there. So we have a different perspective on how many total carries Lance should get in a game. I feel that early on in his career, it was very reasonable to lean on that was a known quantity coming in. Will that need to change going forward with the results of Lance's injuries? Probably, but Kyle Shanahan is a very stubborn individual, so I'm not convinced that it necessarily will. But we certainly have more points we're going to disagree on in this one, and I'm excited for it, but want to bring in a couple of super chats before we do. Joey Mellon, sneakerhead here on the channel, says, what if they make the playoffs, start Trey, and they lose? This kid is already in a tough spot with the fans and mental space. This goes back to putting him in a bad position to succeed in my mind. That if you have gone through this season and been successful, gotten to the playoffs, and now you're thinking about putting Trey Lance in, there's less upside and more downside. I think we've seen Kyle Shanahan continue with the hot hand. So my belief is towards the end of the season, he probably would keep Trey out in that one. And so, yeah, that's the way in which I would have it laid out there. How do you see this? If they make the playoffs and then turn it over to Trey and he were to lose, would that not be a worse situation for Trey Lance? Oh, we may have gotten frozen. Randon, we are going to remove him, kick him out of the screen and stream, and allow him to come back in. All right, so Joey, that's my feeling on it as well, that would be putting him in a poor situation. We've got another super chat that I'm going to get to, and then we'll go through some comments until we can return our co-host to the program, at which time we'll be talking about whether or not Kyle mismanaged Trey from the start of this thing. Chris Royal coming in with the super chat. Chris, good to see you, my friend. He says, lean on his legs, yes, but do not consistently run him up the middle where linemen are consistently falling. This does go back to frequency of use, specific plays to put him in on. I, again, don't have a huge issue with where Trey Lance is used, who he's getting tackled by. Certainly as a quarterback, you're getting hit by defensive linemen when you're sitting in the pocket as well. I believe that we have blown this one up to a bigger level than it really needs to be because of the frequency of injuries that Trey Lance has suffered, much like the PTSD that all of us as 49ers fans feel towards injuries as a whole. I mean, we get to a point where a certain percentage of our fan base is ready to write off George Kittle, said that we shouldn't re-sign Deebo Samuel. It was the debate around Raheem Mostert. Injuries really play a pivotal role in the way in which we look at things here as a fan base because we have had so many pivotal injuries, Trey Lance just being the most recent. And I think that it calls to mind a lot of the aggravation and frustration that we feel with this being a continual issue. Joey Mellon, sneakerhead here on the channel. Last year, we were worried about Deebo running too much. Starting in Chicago, I was worried about Trey running too much. It is fair to worry about. And again, when we're talking about percentage of usage, that's a debate I'm here for. I think that's a reasonable debate. But then saying that because that usage was a little bit higher, that then Kyle Shanahan deserves blame for Trey's injury, I'm not willing to make that logical leap. I, again, believe that early on in the season, that was going to be a significantly higher percentage than later on, as Trey Lance began to pick up significant skills in the offense as far as hitting those short and intermediate throws. Those are definitely what I believe to be the steps that would take him through this season. We've got our co-host back. We're bringing him in. There he is.
A little turmoil there, a little technical difficulties, as they say. We had super chats, so I just rolled on through them. And, I'm absolutely thrilled that no one contested anything I said. It was all just there as if it was fact. Word is law.
Yes, that's right. So let's get back to something we do disagree on so that you can let me know that I'm wrong about something. And let's talk about the mismanagement or non-mismanagement of Trey. So we're still talking about Coach Shanahan here. And the question is, has Kyle mismanaged Trey from the start of this thing? What's your belief, Random?
Yeah, I think he has. And this was even before the injury, I thought it was mismanaged. I mean, you knew that I wanted him starting from day one. And reason being is this season, everybody's talking points were, well, we have a Super Bowl roster. Why are we going to develop a quarterback on the Super Bowl roster, right? What if he's not ready? Are we going to waste the season? We just paid Deebo this amount of money. Like all this kind of stuff. Oh, like we should be winning. We should do this kind of stuff. We know we can win with Jimmy. All right. Like all the people talking heads. And then some people were like, oh, well, you got to put Trey Lance in there sometime. Right. And me too. But do you think there would have been that much pressure under Trey Lance if he started last season after the team won 6 games? Like if the team won 6 games the previous year, he comes in 2021 and just gets to work out all the kinks. The team progresses. We still probably make the playoffs or have a similar record. And then he goes into this season. Like, I get it. Like that, for me, like there would have been way less pressure. But you get to the NFC Championship game, we lose a game that we probably shouldn't have lost, and then that same Rams team wins the Super Bowl. Fans are like, oh, we should have won the Super Bowl at that point. We could have won we were this close to winning 2 Super Bowls. Like, we have a Super Bowl roster. Why are we trying to trade this young kid up? And you see it a lot. You see it a lot in the talking heads in 49ers football, in this chat right now, that people want to win now. Me too. I get it. I believe we can win with Trey Lance. But after a 6-win season and coming in 2021, like, you could have let him take his lumps, to where at this point in this season, he isn't running 13 times a game. And now maybe he gets injured last season. It is what it is, and the Niners have another bad year. But I think it's just been bad decision after bad decision. I think it was a bad decision to trade up 3 first-round picks to move up to 3rd, because I think they probably could have got him on draft day for less. I think it was a bad decision not to trade, trade away Jimmy Garoppolo earlier and hold on to him for whatever. I mean, they probably could have got a 2nd-round pick because he was healthy at that point, right? So is there the negligence there? And then you don't start him from week 1 and let him go through the reps. And now I think you're coddling the kid, because I believe he's ready to throw. Like, at what point, like, you're facing the Seahawks, like the team that's supposed to be garbage. And like, why not let him see how the first half goes? Let him sling it. Like, and see how the first half goes. Like, use his legs at opportune times. Let him scramble, get outside. Like, I don't know. Like, I just think that the usage of, and then so many design runs up the middle. Like, the kid is not a battering ram. Like, design stuff to move it outside. Like, to be honest with you, if he got injured on an outside run because it was a scramble or something like that, and he took a hit that he wasn't supposed to take, maybe I'm not as harsh on Kyle. But I think that, like, all these bad dominoes for me, back to back to back to back, it just seems like Kyle Shanahan doesn't know what the F he's doing. And like, his mismanages this whole situation with going forward. I think he was a little toddler in the corner. Like, I want a good quarterback. Let's move up to get a good quarterback. They get him, and then they don't use him. Like, they don't use him or try to envelop him or do this kind of stuff. And I understand that injuries happen. It happens all the time. You know, like I said, Jimmy Garoppolo got injured on a run play, and he wasn't even touched. Right. So it happens.
Injuries in the NFL, absolutely.
It is football. But when you put yourself in bad situations, you're more likely to have bad things happen. So that's where my biggest thing is.
I have to say, I agree with some of what you said here, and some I don't, right? I do think that they have, as an organization, mismanaged Trey Lance to some extent. I don't share your beliefs around last season. I thought it was the right move to stick with Jimmy Garoppolo. To me, the fact that we ended up in the NFC Championship game is proof positive that was the right call. It did mean that we wouldn't get the progression for Trey Lance, but it gave us a shot at going to the Super Bowl and bringing home a title. Obviously fell a little bit short in there. It did feel like the organization didn't get behind Trey Lance early in this offseason where they could have propped him up. I also thought that to be flawed. But when I look at them going out to get Trey Lance, I'm torn there. I can see that one both ways. Was it a bit of a mistake to go up and get a quarterback with so many draft picks that needed time to develop on a roster that was ready to win right now? Potentially. And the 49ers may just have gotten their talent evaluation wrong there. They may just have thought Trey Lance was a little bit further along, gotten him into the building, and been less comfortable. And if that's a trust issue for Kyle Shanahan and turning the reins over, that's one thing. But I would contend with what we've seen on the field that Lance has serious upside, and it's been shown to us pretty repeatedly that there are some issues that he has to work through with that short and intermediate game accuracy. And until he did, it felt necessary to win games to lean on those legs. And I have to point to the 49ers having lost to Chicago in week 1. And although we were playing the Seahawks early on in that game, the pressure on the 49ers to win was immense, because if they had gone down 0-2 to start the season, it would have been disaster. People would have doubted Trey Lance. They'd be calling for Jimmy Garoppolo. So I believe it was that pressure that forced the 49ers into leaning on Trey Lance, even in a game where they probably could have allowed him to pass a bit more. But again, I contend it would have shifted as the season went on. That would have been the maturation of Trey Lance. I'll never have a chance to see that actually happen on the field with the injury. And again, I do agree that if I'm choosing the number of carries per game, it would be lower. But when I look at on one fluke play where he gets hit by a linebacker who's only 20, 25 pounds heavier than Lance, and that's what breaks the ankle, I look at that more of a fluke, even though it was through the heart of the defense.
I just think it's blatant mismanagement. I think it's just like this whole situation seems reactionary. It doesn't seem like they have a plan whatsoever. And when you're successful, like you and I plan every single episode. And now I'm not equating us to a multi-billion-dollar franchise, but yeah, our shows could be decent if we came in here and winged it and just kind of started talking. Sure, it could potentially be good, but having a guideline, having these fans in the chat, throwing super chats in there, having this structure a little bit, as well as some adaptation, brings for a good show. It seemed to me that Shanahan didn't get Stafford, didn't get Deshaun Watson, and then he was crying in his corner or unhappy and made this reactionary. Let's move up 3 picks because we like all 5 quarterbacks. Well, if you like all 5 quarterbacks, then stay at 12 and get the 5th one. We're going to move up to 3. Then we're going to do all of our due diligence that we didn't do throughout the season, is what it sounded like, to pick the right quarterback. Well, then what if you don't like all the quarterbacks enough to take them at 3? Then you've already made that decision. You don't think the Dolphins would have taken that trade a week before the season or a week before the draft? Like, you don't think that even if all 4 teams, which has never happened in the history of football, the first 4 picks were all quarterbacks, you don't think the Lions? You don't think the Lions would take the 3 that same deal for them to go up and get Trey Lance? Like, to me, it just seemed like reactionary there. And then,
I agree, but if we're talking about the draft pick, I think we need to include John Lynch in the equation, right? We cannot just simply lay that at the feet of Kyle Shanahan, as much as we might like to, with the combination of the play calling.
No, I'm getting there. So we go all the way to that, and then you spend 2 third-round picks on big running backs that you don't even use. I mean, Ty Davis Price got some run in that game, most of it after the injury. I know he had some runs on the first drive, but you don't use Trey Sermon at all. You bring in all these running backs, which we'll get to in a second. I mean, I'm not blaming 100% on Shanahan because it's football.
Sure.
Right? It is football. You're going to get hit. You're going to have opportunities. I believe Trey Sermon probably would have got more run last year if he didn't get a concussion on the only game that he started. Or one of the only games that he played. So, yeah, we're doing this all what ifs, and it's, horseshoes and hand grenades and all this kind of stuff. I'm just pissed that I think it's blatantly mismanagement. I think you have to limit the amount of shots that your quarterback is taking. If I see it and Justin Fields in an interview openly says Trey Lance has taken too many hits and he sees it, like, there's a lot of other people, then why doesn't Shanahan see it? Because if you look at the 2 throws that he completed, both dimes in that game. In the second one on the slant, it didn't get the first down, but he stared an open blitzer in the face and threw a bullet to that slant play. So, like, get out of here with like if he can hit layups, then whatever, But you look at Jalen Hurts'
but you can't
progression.
contend that he's consistently hitting those, right? I mean, you would acknowledge that that's an area he struggles, right?
It doesn't matter though for me, because he also hits the big plays. He also gets the deep shots, right? You look at Jalen Hurts last year, like, took all the lumps in spades, one of the lowest completion percentages in all of football. Still ran for over 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
And now is just blowing the top off because he took those lumps throwing the football. Right.
And I want to say that, because I disagree slightly with you here, what I think it some people hear is because I'm slightly disagreeing that I'm not in support of Lance. And I want to just make sure, I don't see any comments that say that, but I just want to make sure to reiterate that's not the case. To me, it's about the nuance of it, right? Like, am I a huge fan of Lance? Did I think he was going to succeed this year? Did I believe he was going to start all year? Yes, absolutely. I thought the maturation was going to occur throughout that season, but I'm willing to acknowledge those flaws that I see in there. And that leads a little bit to Heartless Zhao's comment here, the super chat. Too much hedging. 3 first-round picks equals we're all in. I got to say that's a little bit true and a little bit old school thinking. The value of draft picks has crashed, and the way in which teams are moving them has absolutely changed. With the ability to keep Jimmy Garoppolo on this roster, a starting caliber quarterback, it allowed the 49ers to both invest those picks and try to let Trey Lance mature over time. Now, obviously that plan didn't work out, but I don't think that with that hindsight, you can go back and cherry pick the plan entirely. I view this as the 49ers.
That's like keeping your girlfriend and having that's like keeping your girlfriend and having a girl that you're texting on the side. Like that's not, like we talked about this last week.
In that example, the new girl left you and you still had the old one to go back to because Jimmy's here right now and we don't have to turn it over to Nate Sudfeld.
And when has that ever worked? So my thing is this, like I am 100% agree with Heartless. I said it last week or in the week before and multiple times. As soon as we made the pick for Trey Lance, we had 5 years to win a Super Bowl. So why is like I understand fans want to win every year. I want to win every year. But last year, if we went 500 and we took the lumps with Trey Lance and knowing that as a fan that we have a Super Bowl roster and we took some lumps, I'd be even more excited this year than I was.
That's fair. That is absolutely fair. Again, I was happy with the NFC Championship game, so I stick with that. But I understand your logic here, and I appreciate the dialogue, Randon. Kevin coming in with a non-football related question. Rob, Randon, and chat room, does anyone know what happens to fresh corn on the cob if you microwave it? Will it just heat up or turn into popcorn? I have no idea, Kevin, but please pop that SOB into the microwave and let us know what happens. Randon, have you conducted this experiment yourself?
Yeah, you could take corn on the cob with the husk still on, put it in the microwave, and that husk just falls straight off. You don't have to worry about any of the strings. You don't have to do any of that kind of it's possibly the best way to get a husked corn on the cob unhusked is by microwaving it.
I like it. I like it. Another chat coming in. Paul Diego. I like this one because it's on my side. Rob Shue. I feel like if the roles were reversed and all Lance did was throw and got hurt, everyone would be crying about not running him and using his legs. Again, I just wanted to throw that in there for the hell of it. Let's transition. Still talking about coach, but getting off the quarterback subject.
I wouldn't be, by the way.
No.
If he got sacked and some defensive lineman rolled up on his ankle and he was sitting in the pocket and took the hit, he got injured, I would say that's football because that's part of the quarterback position. Shanahan is choosing to run him up the middle.
Yes. I mean, yes, he is. Going into Kyle Shanahan one layer deeper, is Kyle Shanahan an offensive mastermind in your opinion?
I think he's overrated now as a Niners fan because yeah, he gets a lot out of the team. But like if you think of one thing for him and his father, the two words I would say is run game. Right? They're supposed to have one of the best run game and obviously 2019 we were number 2 overall. But when's the last time that the Niners had a 1,000-yard rusher in the Shanahan era? I'll answer for that real quick. It's never. So like he has had a consistent back. He's gotten all these players injured. Like he doesn't right now, your number 1 and number 2 rushers on the team are your quarterback and a $25 million wide receiver. Like, why is it not something along the lines of, I don't know, the 2 third-round picks that you spent, Elijah Mitchell? Like, I mean, yeah, players get injured, but like you're not setting up your team. Like, why isn't the running backs that type of thing? Like it makes no sense to me. And I just think like he knows he has a good defense and he has all these plays in his bag, but he shrivels sometimes. And he just, let's throw all these cautionary plays. If it were me and I'm a head coach, I don't have any coaching experience, but don't you think you would have come out in the Seahawks game? Hey man, we just had this horrible game in the rain. Why don't we just sling the rock? Like, let's sling the rock and see what he can do. Let's run the football. Like we should go out there and, bludgeon this team to death. And if I have to make adjustments, then make adjustments. But like for me, it's like there's no running backs over 1,000 yards. Like he was even with a team that had a bad quarterback, like why can't you run the football? Like why can't we run the football with anybody? Like you're bringing in and I love Jeff Wilson, but he's coming after an injury. Like and he's not the best running back. You can't get any yards with Ty Davis Price. Trey Sermon is now off your team. You spent a 3rd-round pick on him. I thought Shanahan was supposed to be able to make anybody who can put on pads run for 1,000 yards, yet he hasn't done it his entire time as a coach for the Niners. And you're like, well, that's injury. That's part of it. Elijah Mitchell had broken ribs and multiple other injuries, came back, and he ran the ball over 27 times in a win. Like, you're putting your players in bad spots. Yeah, he chose to suit up, but that's because the doctor said so. But you're putting your players in bad spots. We were winning that game. You didn't trust any other running back on your team to carry the ball 5, 6, 7 times. Like, it makes zero sense to me sometimes, some of this stuff. Yeah, some of the plays he draws up, the leak concept that has never worked, but he's always open, and others, this kind of stuff. It just baffles me. And I think you look at it from different points in his career that, okay, yeah, he's a head coach now. He's learning how to do this, that kind of thing. But at some point, you have to be leaders of men, and you're not putting your players in the best position to succeed. At least some of the players. I thought he put Debo in the best place to succeed.
He most
and get his
definitely put Debo in the best
$25
place
million
to succeed.
thing. But that was a mutual agreement, right? It also got Debo more money. So, man, like I think the fact that like I'm just so pissed off of the injury that I'm going ape shit on this now. But I also think that there is some real stuff to be looked at. Like, if you can supposed to get all these things out of running backs, why don't we have a 1,000-yard back? Like, we were second in the NFL in rushing in 2019, and we don't have a 1,000-yard running back. We can't just pick anybody off the street, right? Because we're getting the bones of Tevin Coleman to come and play for this team. Why aren't we getting this young buck and giving him some play? Why didn't Jordan Mason get one effing carry in a dominating win to see what the kid can do? Like,
I will say, going on here? I love the fact that we're disagreeing on this, because the chat is loving each of our sides. Like, when you're speaking, all there is hallelujah, Randon, preach, brother. And then when I come in, the other side thinks. And so it feels a little bit of like, man, it feels a little bit like head to head. We do have Jack Hammer in the chat. Just got to bring that in. Jack saying they gained over 5 yards per carry in the first quarter against Seattle, even if you take out the Samuel run. I want to talk about some of the things that you brought up there. So the question here is Kyle Shanahan an offensive mastermind? And certainly you laid out your case very well as to why you believe that he is not. My answer is that yes, he absolutely is. He's only coached in 5 seasons, and from his direct head coaching tree already has 2 head coaches out there with Robert Saleh and Mike McDaniel. Obviously, people are chasing his greatness and originality all the time. How many coaches currently run a Shanahan scheme? McVay, LaFleur, Saleh, McDaniel, Arthur Smith. Nearly 20% of the league is using Kyle's offense. Many more teams
his dad's offense
are incorporating things in there. Yes, what was born from Mike Shanahan, but completely grew through Kyle Shanahan. I don't think anyone could argue what Kyle Shanahan has done to his father's offense is remarkable. When you listen to the media members that watch a ton of film, they all gush about Kyle Shanahan. My question is, are they all wrong? When Steve Young says he wishes he could have played for Kyle Shanahan, is that something that we should ignore? No, these NFL great minds that are out there all understand what Kyle brings to the table and that it is special. They understand how hard it is to win in the NFL. And you talked about not having a 1,000-yard rusher. Why haven't the Niners had a 1,000-yard rusher? It's health. Can you say Kyle mismanages the health or the uses of his players? Perhaps. That's the part where I think it's fair for debate and why I think it's important to have nuance in this conversation. Because, Brandon, you and I are not on opposite sides of this issue. We are much more closely aligned than it would seem, but we do disagree on a couple of key points. And that's where I think the nuance is. He has a type of player that he prefers at running back and a play style that he prefers. It's fair to say that those types of runners have proven to be a little bit more brittle. And since then, he's been searching out a bigger body back, obviously whiffed on Sermon. I would argue it's way too early to have an opinion on TDP. I saw some things that were positives. And so if you're going to blame someone for that, is it all on Shanahan or is that also on the front office and the scouting department? When you look at all of the backs that he has had, right? There have been 10 backs with over 100 carries in the time that Shanahan has been here. Of those 10 times in his 6 years, of those 10 times, he's had a back with 3.9 yards per carry or more every single time. 80% of the time, he's gotten that back to average 4 yards per carry or more. That's including Carlos Hyde, Alfred Morris, and Tevin Coleman, right? 70% of the time, when you take those 3 players out of it and you just look at the backs that Shanahan appreciates, 70% of the time he's gotten that back to average 4.4 yards per carry. So the idea that no one has reached 1,000 yards has far more to do with number of games played. When you look at the list, there are plenty of incomplete seasons for those backs, but it's not the efficiency. And the efficiency within the offense shows me the genius.
I think mastermind, the word mastermind, maybe that was just the word, dictates that he's the best in the game at his offensive scheme. And I don't think that's true. I think that you look at the Niners offense was predictable last season. It wasn't mastermind. He wasn't pulling his bag of tricks. He wasn't completing stuff on fourth down. And I think if he's such an offensive mastermind, then we need to go. Like, we need to go for it on all those things. We need to have the cojones to go for those types of things. I think he's missing some things as a coach. Do I think he's one of the top 10 coaches in football? Yes. Do I think he's one of the top 5 play callers, or at least his offensive scheme is top 5 in the NFL? Sure. But you're talking mastermind. I'm talking the tippity top of the tippity top. I'm talking the Trent Williams of offensive schemes. And I just don't think he's there yet. I don't think he is. And I think the fact that you have some of these efficiencies, well, okay, then great. Then, but you also picked running backs that, and if you're saying that it's all John Lynch, that's poppycock. Because if it's about his offense, Shanahan's going to have something to say about it. So, like, he was in the room to move up to get Sermon. He was in the room when Ty Davis Price was there, when they went out and spent an egregious amount of money on McKinnon or Joe Williams or any of these backs. Carlos Hyde was there when he got there. So, yes.
And Alfred Morris was a desperation heave, right? You had to bring him in again because of an injury depleted room.
I just think, and maybe he needs to go against my philosophy where you don't draft running backs high, but maybe you go next year in the second round and get a running back that can be the bell cow, because he needs a running back. He wants to use he wants to use Mitchell 25, 27 carries a game. Maybe you need to go get a Najee Harris or Javonte Williams or Breece Hall that has the 3-down capability. That's a bigger back that can take the punishment. And obviously some of those guys get injured too, right? Saquon Barkley, I saw in the chat, was somebody who mentioned, and all those types of things. So, maybe that's something that they need in order for Shanahan's off running backs to hold up, is go in and to say, hey, like, I know we don't normally draft running backs this high, but let's go out and get a juggernaut running back, and let's see him be a 3-down back.
Yeah. So what bothers me, I suppose, Miguel coming in with the super chat, McVay runs Kyle Shanahan's system better. Kyle Shanahan is overrated. What bothers me is the only people that I hear Kyle Shanahan is overrated from are 49ers fans. Like, that to me is what bothers me. I don't hear it from the NFL media, right? The national media. I don't hear it from the ex-players. I don't hear it from the talking heads. It is typically fans that are saying that. And I think it's that familiarity breeding contempt. It is seeing all of the mistakes so close up, but being too close to appreciate the glory of what is the system. Does Sean McVay run Kyle Shanahan's system well? Absolutely. I'm not taking anything away from Sean McVay, but I am not prepared to say that Kyle Shanahan is overrated in what he does well.
I just think that people give him too much credit, and there's not enough criticism in my opinion.
I agree. He deserves more criticism. That is where we are in alignment.
Because you look at the talking heads, like, they glorify him, and it's talking points on national media. But I was eating lunch today, having a beer, and they had Trevor Lawrence over just 2 games this season as a top 10 quarterback in the NFL on ESPN today. So, like, let's pump the brakes on what the national media actually knows and what they're just throwing out there for clickbait, because those types of things. Now, been talking a lot of crap on Shanahan. Let me give him some pub a little bit. I think he got the most out of Jimmy Garoppolo that you probably could have gotten. I think no other coach in the NFL would have got Debo $25 million because of the fact that the way he ran last season. I think the fact that you're looking at a system that the wide zone does help benefit the running backs. Maybe we have the wrong running backs. I don't know. Maybe Shanahan doesn't trust the trust factor, where he doesn't have a bell cow running back. We're getting all these late undrafted guys that are not bell cows and treating them like bell cows, right? So maybe he needs to have a harem of running backs that are he's able to rotate, but that doesn't seem like to be his game, where he rotates back for even carries. So it almost seemed that way this game, right? Ty Davis Price got 14 carries. Jeff Wilson got 14 carries, I think, or 15 carries, something like that. So maybe it was this game. Maybe he's realizing that he needs to kind of, spread the love around and get that going. I don't know. I've been frustrated with Shanahan on a lot of things. His fourth down calls, overuse of Trey Lance. Maybe this is just me stuffing down all my hatred or all my, all my confusion about what's going on and letting it all out at once. But, I think the fact that he wanted Trey Lance and went out and got Trey Lance, he thinks that there is more to his play calling game, that he thinks there's more to unlock with his scheme.
Oh, certainly.
And it hasn't been there.
A dual threat quarterback would unlock more for Shanahan. There's no doubt.
But then I go back, then why aren't you using both threats? Like, you only seem to want to run him up the middle and not let him go. So, I argue that is a sample size issue and that we would have seen that change, but it's impossible for me to be proven incorrect or correct on that with the way things turned out, unfortunately. Heartless Zhao says Dolphins offense with McDaniel, that's our potential. So far, I mean, this is early in the season. Let's see how things play out before we make wide sweeping generalizations about either where Miami is headed this season or where San Francisco will end up. But do agree that what you see there in that offense is shades of what you have seen with San Francisco. They were throwing the rock.
They are.
Like, McDaniel is the run game coordinator, and he was supposed to bring a better run, and they haven't had 1,100-yard rusher this season. They brought in Chase Edmonds, paid him the most money the first day of free agency, and benched him in game 2 for the Maserati. So, is the run game really working over there either? No, they're relying on Tua, Tyreek Hill, and Jalen Waddle to use their speed, getting open, and they're slinging the rock all over the place.
But I would say, was that the intention coming in, or did they pay that much money to Chase Edmonds with the intention of riding him throughout the season, and they just pivoted? So, again, I am not opposed to criticizing Kyle Shanahan. What I strenuously object to is the idea of saying that he's not a top coach in the league, saying that he's not a top offensive mind within the league. Those are what I disagree with. I don't think he's immune from criticism at all. Around Town Collective comes in to say, it bugs me. Kyle never self-reflects and takes any part of the blame. That's the mental roadblock that will keep us from winning the Super Bowl, in my opinion. I like the ending with in your opinion, because any definitive statement about it holding us back from winning in the future, it feels like a prediction that I'm just not willing to get behind. I will say, though, Kyle Shanahan's stubbornness is an area of his personality that gets to me as well. I'm not so sure if he is as stubborn as he comes across, or whether he just likes to be stubborn with the media more than he actually is with altering what he does. It'll be interesting when Trey Lance comes back to see if he pivots, because my guess is he'll say, no, I've got to run Trey. That's one of his skill sets. I'm going to use his legs. But I wonder if the carries go down pretty significantly.
I just think the way he handled the media about it, it pretty much came off like, oh, do you guys even watch football? That's what it came off at. Yeah, we're established credentialed writers. We watch plenty of football. We might not be cranking out as much film as you do, but yeah, we watch football. And why is it not fair for me to ask you a question about the usage of Trey Lance? After him getting injured, you are a head coach for $1 billion franchise. And for some reason, multiple times throughout his tenure here, he seems to take the question and answer it like a little child. And he doesn't, I don't believe, represents the franchise well in those instances. Oh, are we even going to be alive on Sunday? Oh, I don't know. That was a condescending answer. This was a condescending answer.
For sure. Condescending is true. Acting like a child is a bit of hyperbole to me. That's back to the nuance of, do I agree with the way in which he answers those questions? No. Will I take it one step forward to bash his character, or to say that we should, as Coach Garan Johnson says, no, it's us knowing football, #trade Kyle. Am I on board with the trade Kyle train? I absolutely am not. Let me ask you that, because we do have disagreement here, but we're closer in alignment than I think many people would assume.
For verbiage, then fine. But I think he's definitely condescending to the people in the media.
Yeah. Would you trade Kyle? Are you at that point? Are you at that point where you want to move on from Kyle Shanahan?
No, I don't. I mean, we you can't fire a coach that's winning games. Right? Who was the guy? What was it? Schottenheimer for the Chargers? Didn't they fire him after a 13-win season? And then their franchise went down after that. That was just brutal. So like at this, like I still think he's one of the top 10 coaches in the NFL. I still think he's probably one of the top 5 coaches in the NFL. But he's not above reproach for me as far as criticism.
Yes,
goes.
nor for me. Me. Not above criticism, but I'm measured, I think, in the level of criticism that I am willing to lay at his feet. Just want to make sure that I'm not missing any of these critical comments. We will definitely get back into it. All right, here we go. So let's talk about Kyle Shanahan and his trust of his players. We'll keep this one a short topic, but does Kyle Shanahan trust anybody in his offense? It does seem as if that's a question at some times. You have the incident with Brandon Ayuk last season. You have some of the running backs that it would appear he doesn't trust. What's your sense on this? I know this was a topic you wanted to hit.
I think he trusts some people, and I think that he puts the doghouse thing as like, he doesn't. I don't know. How do I put this? I think he trusts some people. Let's start there. Like Deebo Samuel, I think he fully trusts.
Yes.
I think Kittle, he fully trusts.
Yep, me too.
Trent Williams.
And Elijah Mitchell.
Much it. Maybe
no,
Elijah
you don't think Mitchell?
Yeah, I think he trusts Mitchell because he used them as a bell cow last year.
Yeah, so, I'd say Mitchell, and then Jeff Wilson Jr. feels pretty high, and maybe Juice. Like that would round out the list for me.
Yeah. I guess you could talk me into all those. Like. So, like at that point, man, how was I going to go for this? At that point, like you have more people on the offense. Like you not trusting these other guys, like to get you like elite 5 carries, 6 carries a game, 10 carries a game, right? Like you drafted these guys, you practice them all week, like especially in wins, like or just change of pace, right? Like I get it. It's I get you have to win, but I think sometimes like you trust solely these guys and you get so focused on throwing it. Like it seemed like the majority of 2019 was Kittle over the middle. Like they just kept running the same play over and over. 3rd and 5, Kittle has 3 people on him. Make Kittle over the middle. We're running the same play. We trust only one guy to make a play on 3rd and 5. Like that's where I think sometimes he just needs to have a little bit more rope on some of these guys. And I know he's the tactician and Ayuk has come out and said, hey, if you're not running the route 100% the way he wants it, he's going to let you know it. Like, okay, great. That's how you should run a practice and how you should demand perfection out of your players. But when it's game time, like that's not the time for you to be punishing somebody, right? Like that's the time to let your players play and let your athletes be athletes. At some point you have to trust that Trey Lance is going to make the right football play in the game.
Yeah.
Right. You have to trust that the running back that you spent a 3rd round pick on is able to carry the ball 5 to 10 times. And you don't have to give the ball to Elijah Mitchell 30 times a game. Right. Like at some point you have to be able to trust those things. Sometimes you see, Jennings getting some run. I think sometimes you see Ayuk getting some run, but it seems like a lot of people get in the doghouse, maybe rightfully so. Right. I mean, I'm talking about players that are successful, but Dante Pettis wasn't successful and he was in the doghouse for a reason.
No.
So maybe I'm being critical. I don't know what you think on this, but I think there is some trust issues sometimes with Kyle Shanahan.
I think that to me, it's more of an issue with the quarterbacks. That's where it flares up. I don't have as much of an issue. I did at the time with Brandon Ayuk, but let's be honest with the way in which that turned out. I have to second guess my own logic there that it turned out pretty well. Brandon Ayuk bounced back and it appeared that there was some motivation that hit him later in the season. I would say that with the quarterbacks, I think he did damage Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that there's no question that he showed a lack of faith in him. And then I think he was starting the same trend with Trey Lance. So I do believe when it comes to his quarterback, again, there's more room for criticism of Kyle Shanahan, an area that I want him to continue to grow. But again, I reiterate that fact that these flaws in Kyle Shanahan are not enough to offset my belief in his value. But let's transition.
No, those can be learned. Like that,
yes,
that can be
yes.
changed.
Yes,
right?
they can.
And
absolutely. And that's my hope as he continues to grow. I thought bringing in Anthony Lynn might be a step in the right direction, to have a calm presence in the room, a leader in the room.
I like the way, like going and watching the highlights, I like the way Jimmy Garoppolo played for the most part. He took a lot more deep shots downfield than I ever saw him take last year. And so I think the fact that maybe he has learned a little bit, or maybe he's just like, hey, I'm playing with house money, man. Like this is my last season no matter what. let's sling the rock all over the place. No consequences. Maybe that's it. I have no idea, but we'll see. I think sometimes, like I said, I think this episode for me, all this pent up aggression is just getting let out. And I think ultimately it'll calm down after a week because, I got to be honest with you. I wanted to see Trey Lance play the year.
Yeah.
I wanted to see him be successful. I was
Me
100%
too.
in his corner. And so, maybe that's just a little bit of spillover from that. But I think anybody is not above reproach, right? You look at Andy Reid, one of the top offensive minds in the NFL, never won a Super Bowl for a long time. And they asked him, hey, is he really going to be one of the top coaches in the league? Or is it just that he hasn't won a Super Bowl? Like there was a lot of talks about, those types of head coaches, right? Is Dan Marino one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game? He never made it to the promised land. Like those, if Shanahan continues going down this path, right? Young coaching career, he's got decades of head coaching left to go. But let's go down that crystal ball. What if he never wins another Super Bowl in 10 years? Like, is he still going to be thought of as a top 5, top 10 coach in the league when he's had multiple chances with Super Bowl stacked rosters to do so? I don't think so. Probably not. Like, it's going to be like, hey, Kyle Shanahan can't win the big one, which is already a narrative that's out there. So I don't know. I think
it probably still lands him in the top 10 if we're honest about that. Top 5, no, you absolutely have to win a Super Bowl. But if you take out the outliers of pairing the best quarterback in a generation with the best coach in a generation and getting yourself a dynasty, if you take that outlier out of it, and obviously the pre-salary cap era where our Niners were able to purchase an all-star team, as were the Dallas Cowboys, if you take those out of it, you really don't have many dynasties, quote unquote. And so you look at, hell, even Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, you could absolutely see a scenario playing out where they only win the one Super Bowl, right? And you would still have to acknowledge that was a very special team, very special coach. So I agree. It would be up for debate. It would matter how it played out, but I still think you would be looking at Shanahan. If he is consistently getting his teams to the playoffs, you would be looking at him as one of those top tier coaches as well. We got a super chat coming in from Jungle Karma saying Jimmy hasn't improved since he's been here. Can we trust Kyle to develop a quarterback? We definitely, did touch on the ability to develop quarterbacks or not just a little bit. I would argue this is a weak spot for Kyle Shanahan, that he's not truly developed a quarterback. And the first real chance he had at it was with Trey Lance, someone that he brought in that he could develop. And I would argue he's not doing a great job of it so far. This would be the area I would probably criticize Shanahan the sharpest in, is his ability to develop a quarterback.
I think a part of that is also the player that you pick, right? The athlete has to put in the work, right? So I don't know in what CJ Beathard work ethic is, but I know Trey Lance worked his ass off, right? So if he can't get the best out of Trey Lance to be successful, then yeah, that's partly on Kyle. Like, do you blame him that CJ wasn't a starter in this league? I don't know, maybe. Like, he's a 3rd round pick and doesn't always work out. But I don't know, like, the head coach developing is a lot of it is part of the mental game, right? But the player still has to make the right throws. They still have to learn and make the right reads. They have to still play the game, so it's a symbiotic relationship at that point. And you can't say that you can't give Belichick the sole reason that Brady won all those rings. You can't.
No,
Brady put in the time and effort. And
Brady's the GOAT of this generation, maybe of the entire league, as far as quarterbacks go.
So I think it's a symbiotic relationship.
Oh, totally agree.
I think where the development comes in is the mental part, right? Or maybe pushing where he needs to push and pulling where he needs to pull, and being able to adjust his coaching style to the player that he has at hand in the most important position in the offense. Maybe we'll see. I don't know. I think it's too early to say because it's only been negative at that point. He had established quarterback in Matt Ryan, but he coached him up during his only MVP season. You have a player like Jimmy Garoppolo who's been to 2 NFC championship games, 1 Super Bowl. So did he help get the most out of Jimmy, or did he hinder Jimmy by calling the same plays over and over again, or not calling plays that make him throw? I don't know. Like, you can take so many different angles with this and probably have an intelligent argument to where I think this question won't be answered for another decade or two, because the fact that Trey Lance will be the number one response to this at the end of Trey Lance's career, whether he's successful at developing quarterbacks or not, because how many coaches develop more than one quarterback? Right? I mean, you have to get you get
very
one.
few get that chance. You either fail and you're out of a job, or you succeed and then that's your quarterback going forward.
Like Bill Walsh too. Like I'm trying to think of coaches off the top of my head that had more than one all-pro level quarterback that they personally coached up and went out and got. Right? I mean, Holmgren, did he have Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers, right? They both won Super Bowls with Holmgren, or did Aaron Rodgers win with a different coach?
I do want I couldn't tell you that right off of the bat.
Yeah.
Do you want to bring in Leo R here, though? Sneakerhead said, I wonder how many more non-developed wrecked quarterbacks and big game chokes Kyle Shanahan needs for the Kyle is a genius folks to come back down to earth. Very, very flawed head coach, but not trash. Top 10 at best. That's a lot to unpack right there. So first and foremost, it's entirely possible for Kyle to be an offensive genius and to still be a flawed head coach, to not be a perfect head coach. Those two things can be true. So that's my stance. I'm not saying Kyle is a genius and Kyle is a perfect head coach. So please make sure that everyone does understand I am holding those two things to be true. I think he is a genius and he has areas to improve. I wouldn't say he's a very flawed head coach, and I would beg of you to name 9 coaches in this league that are better than Kyle Shanahan. Honestly, if you could, I would be very impressed, because a lot of those coaches, Kyle Shanahan has had their number. Look at LaFleur. Look at McVay. Like, these are coaches that, sure, in the most recent example, was there a choke? Has Kyle choked in 2 moments? Yes, absolutely. 3 if you count him as an offensive coordinator. I'm not disputing that fact. That's an area I have called out Kyle Shanahan in. But again, to say he's simply not trash, it to me, again, is just being too familiar with the coach and seeing the flaws as bigger than they are. I agree he should be criticized, as Randon has been doing astutely today, but I will not get on board with trading, firing, or Kyle is trash, which obviously Leo is not saying here.
But he also won a lot of big games where we needed to win.
Huge games.
If you're only counting the Super Bowl, then sure. Then yeah, he's choked in the biggest game of every single. But how many coaches win Super Bowls? Like not many, especially if you take Bill Belichick out of the equation. Yeah. You got some astute listeners in there. Andy Reid, Donovan McNabb, and Patrick Mahomes. And you could arguably say Alex Smith had his best season under Andy Reid as well. So, absolutely. All right, let's move on to a topic that's less controversial. The chat will be pleased with this one. And this is a surprise to Randon as well, because I didn't forewarn him about this. But before we get to a point in the show where we're trailing off and we're at the last topics, I want to bring this up. We are looking for a logo design on this show. Between Two Beards is putting out some merch in the near future. Now, Randon and I are working on that behind the scenes as well, but wanted to open it up to anyone that's interested in creating a design for Between Two Beards. This would be going on a t-shirt. You can feel free to submit any of your designs to 49ersmailbag@gmail.com or hit me up on Twitter. You can find both of those ways to reach me on the YouTube page. If you submit the winning design or the design that we use as the inspiration for the design we put on a t-shirt, you will get yourself a free t-shirt of your size choosing and a Cheers mug from yours truly. So you can win yourself a t-shirt of your own design and the Cheers mug. And hell, why don't we have that person on the program so that they can talk about their design as well? So get those pencils out, draw yourself some killer designs, and send them in to 49ersmailbag@gmail.com. This is genius, isn't it, Randon? Getting the minions to put some work in. I like it. It is crowdsourcing at its best. We are absolutely crowdsourcing the talented group here. Armchair Quarterback One wants to know, why don't you sell some beard oil as well? If we could get our own beard oil fragrance, we will. Eric Dane is going to be making us a design. We're very excited about that. And Ellis10 Sneakerhead here on the channel is excited as well. All right, let's wrap this thing up talking about the upcoming game, observations of the season to this point.
An elite defense, you say. I think you and I were talking about this before the start of the season, believing this to be a very elite unit. Let me just give some tracking numbers on the top unit stats here. Number 1 in passing yards allowed with 142.5 per game. Small asterisks that, yeah, they played on a lake for their first game. But number 1 in yards per carry allowed with 2.6 yards per carry. Number 2 in total rushing yards per game, 67.5. Number 1 in total yards per game with 210. And number 3, tied with Denver, in points allowed per game with 13. The only unfortunate one here, Randon, is they're tied for 19th in sacks. That's sadness for me with my prediction. They're sitting at 4. Right now, the leading team has 10. Are you seeing what we saw prior to the start of the season? Is this defensive unit elite in your mind with the small sample size?
With the small sample size, yes. But you also, we know that the test really hasn't come yet until this next week and the week after. So I'm holding it, but we're going based on a small sample size. Yeah, I think they are. I think the sacks will eventually come up, because right now it's only Nick Bosa, which he's on pace for quite a bit.
25 if we just did the math, but yeah. Much like the Trey Lance math, that's flawed.
So I think the fact that you're also looking at we're creating turnovers, which was a huge thing last season that we weren't doing. Huge. And then you're getting higher play from players like Hufanga that maybe you thought he'd be good, but maybe not this good so far.
Could never have predicted that. He's been so good. So good.
You're getting lockdown corner play from Mosley and Shavarius Ward, which we didn't have last season, right? The linebackers outside of the penalties from Greenlaw have been pretty decent. So, you're going to get Jimmy Ward back, which is obviously going to make the secondary even better. Most likely in the part of the season that we're going to need him, right? You're looking at after 4 weeks, it might take a little longer what they said, but maybe week 6, 7, isn't that Chargers and Kansas City, right? You're definitely going to need him back there. So, I think the defense is coming up. They have a lot of elite tendencies. Obviously the sacks will have to go up to totally get them there. But at this point, I think we're on a very good track.
I do too. It is projecting in the right direction. I agree that really until we get to the meat of the schedule, we won't have a clear idea of what this defense can be. You've got to come up against elite competition, but before you can actually call yourself an elite defense, but it's trending in the right direction. Everything we've seen to this point, save for the sack totals, is where we want it to be. George Source coming in to talk about those sacks. Rob, how many sacks do you think Bosa will get Sunday? He's going against Russell Wilson Jr. And I'll be honest, I never know how to pencil out the way in which we're going to respond to mobile quarterbacks. And I think Russ is less mobile. It certainly appears less mobile this year in his 34th, 35th year on this planet. He's getting up there. The wheels are slowing down a little bit. So I don't think Bosa goes off against Russell Wilson, but I think he comes up with a sack and a half on Sunday. I think he keeps his pace going. I'm putting in the sack and a half. How many do you have for Bosa on Sunday off the top of your head?
I would say at least one. I mean, I would say he at least notches a half sack per game every game of the season. Like he's just looking elite. I think it's easily, we said over 20, right? So he'd have to have at least a sack per game to get that pace. But I mean, man, he's just been absolutely elite. Where's the other defensive lineman that we were like raving about? Like, where are they? Where's the sacks coming in?
It's supposed to be. Look at CJ Grace. Doubt me. Russ a little slower. I don't think so. We'll see, CJ. It looks so through 2 games.
I mean, Jerry Jeudy got injured this last game, so we'll see if he plays. I don't know if he was at practice today. I haven't looked him up. He's not on my fantasy team, so I don't get any of those.
He didn't practice today. He did not.
Cortland Sutton is a young emerging wide receiver. He's not at the elite level because he hasn't produced it for a full season. So, we'll see there. I mean, Javonte Williams, I think, is one of the top running backs in the league if they just let him go. So our run defense against top run teams, can be beat in previous seasons. Will that be, a case this game where the run game is really good? And, that team's going to be in it because Denver is definitely the best defense we faced, for the offense to move. So We'll see how it goes, but I think our defense is going to get a little bit tested on the outside if both Judy and Cortland Sutton play. It's just going to be like last week with both of the Seattle wide receivers, but you're going to have a much better quarterback back there throwing the football. And then this is definitely the best running back that they've faced all season.
Unfortunately, that is a fact that best running backs in a pair and best quarterback that they are going to be facing. Kraftwerk Concrete correctly predicting how many sacks Bosa's getting. 36 sacks on the day. So, just throwing that one out there. Might want to take the over on betting Bosa's sacks with that knowledge now out there. Let's talk about one of those people you mentioned, and that is, well, hell, we'll talk about first the big prediction I made. Bosa getting to 20 sacks. He's on pace right now. Just give me your prediction. You think he hits it? Do you think he cracks 20 sacks with the pace he's on now and how he's looking?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't think. I mean, I think he has the potential to be the sack leader in the NFL. Right? You look at TJ Watt with the torn pectoral. Myles Garrett is going on looks crazy stupid good this season too. Yeah. So you probably have him to contend with, but
that could mean defensive player of the year, right? Oftentimes the sack leader will be that defensive player of the year. That would be huge. Speaking of awards, how about Hufanga? I will eat crow all day, every day, because I was skeptical about the 49ers coming into this season without having competition at that safety spot. I was wrong to doubt Huff coming in and grabbing that spot. He has never looked back. Do you believe he's going to get the recognition he deserves if he keeps up this pace? Will he get a Pro Bowl nod?
It took forever for Jimmy Ward to get a Pro Bowl nod, as well as he's played his entire career. If the interceptions aren't there, he ain't getting the award.
Fair point.
So
fair point.
It's the media and the voters who don't want to spend all the time watching Niners football, the talking heads, if you will. The stats are the main things that get you there. So if he ends the season with 2 interceptions and he's just a machine in the backfield making all these tackles, yeah, there's an outside chance for a Pro Bowl. Yeah, for sure. Because he's been, according to PFF and a lot of other grading systems, he's been in the top 2 for safeties through the first 2 games in a lot of these metrics. So yeah, if he keeps up this historic pace, just based on what he's playing, yeah, sure, Pro Bowl. But ultimately, I think by the end of the season, it's going to be based off of stats. And the safeties will have to take the football away to ultimately get that all-pro nod and the Pro Bowl.
I agree. It'll be based on stats, and I think it is absolutely not going to be the tackles or the pass breakups. It's going to be about the interception. So if he continues on the pace he's on, that could absolutely be a Pro Bowl berth. But if he peaks at 2-3 picks on the year, will be tough. Right now, he's the second highest graded safety per Pro Football Focus, 90.7 overall. He's got the pick and the tip that led to a pick through 2 games. So if he kept up that type of pace where he's forcing turnovers or getting interceptions himself, I agree he will. Do I think he's going to keep it up? I do. He seems to be playing very solidly with instinct. I believe that he does make the Pro Bowl at the end of this year by keeping up that effort. Let's transition to the other side of the same matchup, 49ers defense against Denver's offense, talking about their quarterback. Russell Wilson has been the 49ers kryptonite in the past. He's 16-4 against the 49ers. For those keeping track, that's an 80% win rate. It's not good if you are a 49ers fan. His stats, 64.7% completion over those 20 games, 208.5 yards per game. So not huge passing statistics. A lot of those matchups came with the Legion of Boom, but 36 touchdowns and only 10 interceptions. So very efficient. I see this. Will he be the kryptonite against the Niners? It comes back down to, can the 49ers not turn the ball over and force Russell Wilson to throw an interception or more? They need to force Denver to commit some turnovers in this one. If Russell Wilson is wildly efficient, if he has a clean game where he doesn't throw a pick, I worry that Denver could have a little bit of a bounce back. They've had some down games, and I think they're a more talented team than that record would indicate.
The Broncos have been playing pretty bad this season. They've been winning, like you lose to, you lose week 1 to a bad team, and then they barely won week 2, even though it seemed like they handled that game pretty well. But the offense hasn't been the prolific offense that everybody thought he would be for signing for 250 something million. So, will that eventually come when he has more trust in wide receivers, when he has that more connection. But they have playmakers. I mean, Cortland Sutton's a good wide receiver. You saw Jerry Jeudy take a 60-something yard to the house. Obviously, the defender slipped in that situation, but, part of a slip is making the guy miss too. So, I think Javonte is one of the best running backs, and then Melvin Gordon is definitely one of the best backups in the NFL. That defense is pretty good. So I just think you look at a lot of these come down to being close games, and it just seems that Russell Wilson pulls out the right amount of bag of tricks every single time in the fourth quarter. Like, it just seems like that way, and that's why I say he seems like the ghost of Niners nightmares, because the fact that it always happens, it seems to happen in the fourth quarter.
I'll tell you what, if we are up less than 7 with 3 minutes remaining and Russell Wilson has the ball, I will be tight at that point. I will be clenched, Randon, extremely clenched at that point. Let's get into things to watch other than Russell Wilson, because I don't want to watch Russell Wilson coming up. I want to watch Nick Bosa sacking the hell out of Russell Wilson. So what are some key matchups and what to watch this week? Again, I'll start off with what I already said there, just reiterating. The Niners need to force some turnovers. The defense been on fire to start the season. We went through those numbers where they rank in the league. Russell Wilson has only thrown a pick on average every other game against the 49ers. This needs to be one where they force a pick from Russell Wilson. What's a key matchup or something to watch in this game for you, Randon?
Can the run game be effective now that, with Jeff Wilson? So I think that's huge against the defense. Obviously, the wide receiver matchup, they move Jerry Jeudy around all the time. Will they float Charvarius Ward or Mosley with him across the field all game and make Russell beat him with another wideout or tight end? And then I think on that side is always going to be the defensive line versus a mobile quarterback. I mean, Russ doesn't run anymore, but he's definitely a good scrambler. And so, letting him leak out and doing those types of things has been our downfall for, especially on those game-winning drives. So, ultimately, I think that's been the key for mobile quarterbacks. I think our run game is going to be the thing that needs to come in pretty hard in this. I think it needs to come more from Jeff Wilson. He had a good game last game. He seemed to have a little bit of a pep in his step compared to what I thought he would have. I was a little harsh on him as far as that's concerned, but he had good and bad games last year with burst, and maybe he was just too fresh off that injury. We'll see as he gets another game underneath his belt. And then the player that I'm most intrigued to look at is Jordan Mason. Like, I'm most intrigued because he's going to probably make his debut in actually getting carries. I think that it'll be interesting to see him get some play and to see if he had the same amount of burst that he did in the preseason.
Absolutely will be interesting to see. By the way, Cold Work Ken talking about Jeudy being out, and we heard someone else bringing in Jeudy injured. Just wanted to touch on who didn't practice today. Got to bring up my man, DJ Jones. And anytime the name comes up, got to bring up the barbecue sauce. DJ Jones was not practicing today. I'm torn as to whether I want to see him out there. I think our run game will get going a lot easier if DJ Jones is not on the field, but I pull for the man as an ex-Niner. Also out of practice today, cornerback Patrick Surtain with a shoulder. Going to be interesting to see him going up against Debo. Jerry Jeudy with a rib and shoulder out, and defensive end Randy Gregory with a knee. Got to give Heartless Zhao credit for the tune he's come up with. Huff the Magic Dragon. Yeah, I'm not going to go through the rest of that because I don't have the voice for it, nor do I know the tune of Puff the Magic Dragon, but well played. Live by Levi's frolicking through the autumn rain, tackling the other guys. Heartless Zhao, very creative. Absolutely all about it. I would say my next key matchup there is the red zone defense for the 49ers. I was surprised to see that the Broncos are 0-6 in the red zone this year. Obviously, 2 of those are fumbles at the 1-yard line against Seattle, certainly killed them in that game. But with a quarterback as efficient as Russell Wilson, to be 0-6 in the red zone is surprising, particularly with his legs. Hasn't been using them much. Again, up against this defense, it feels like that trend should hold, that we should be able to keep them out of the end zone. But it's like Jim Harbaugh used to say about the olives in the olive jar. It's one of those things where it's hard to get them out, but once that first olive falls out, they seem to come out in bunches. So that's my concern, is that Russell Wilson turns it back on. We have to get on them early, put our foot on their necks, and just continue to sack Wilson in this one.
Yeah, I mean, you can't let him get rolling, because when he does, I like John B coming in here. Sutton is the better wide receiver. I think so. The reason I said Judy was because I think they seem to move Judy more around the field and put him in different situations. So I would like to see one of our corners follow him. I feel like Sutton's always on the outside. So either Ward or Mosley plays the outside. I would just hate to see Judy, against a nickel all game long when we have better corners out there. So that was my point there. But I do agree that Sutton is the better wide receiver. The red zone defense, is a big thing. I mean, if he can get cooking, as they like to say, and not creating a kitchen fire, is that's where we're going to be. The bend don't break. You make them kick field goals, and we score touchdowns. Obviously, that's how you win. That's a Bill Walton type analysis, as he would say. If we score more points than the other team, you get the W, right? So, but yeah, I think bend don't break and hold them to field goals is definitely going to be important.
Let me ask you a couple final follow-up questions here as we wrap this thing up, Brandon, and talking to those that are here with us. Hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel. And again, Randon's information is down below so that you can subscribe to him, follow him on Twitter, and get a hold of the Hockey Royalty podcast that he does as well. And don't forget about our design contest that we are doing for Between Two Beards. Design a logo that will go on a t-shirt, win yourself one of those t-shirts and a Cheers mug as well. Send in those submissions to 49ersmailbag@gmail.com or hit me up in my DMs on Twitter as well. Appreciate everyone that is here in the chat. Has been some great interaction.
And we'll pub you on Twitter, so that way you can get, if you are a designer looking for more pub, we'll pub you on Twitter repeatedly. You'll be on the website where the gear is sold. So that way you can get more work as well.
And we will have you on the program to talk about your design as well. And thank you for that winning design. Even if it ends up being something we use as inspiration for our ultimate design. Couple things I want to pick your brain on here, Randon. So the run defense for the 49ers has been fantastic. We talked about it earlier, 2.6 yards per carry. But Denver, despite the fumbling issues in the red zone, they're averaging 5 yards per carry. You talked about this with Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon, both averaging 5 yards per carry. Something's got to give there. What do you feel does? Does Denver maintain that 5 yards per carry, or is it closer to San Francisco holding Denver below 3 yards per carry?
I think it'll be somewhere in the middle. I mean, I think the Niners got out pretty quickly, and so they kind of Seattle didn't get to establish the running game as much as they would have liked. And then you have the monsoon of Chicago there. And so I think this will be the first real test. I think it'll be something along the lines, maybe not in the 5 range, but I mean, they're going to be able to run the football for the most part. I mean, not to the level of maybe 100-yard game from either running back, but Javonte's got burst. It takes one seam to get a good game. So I think the fact that I don't think it'll be 2.6 yards per carry. I also don't think it'll be 5. I think it'll be somewhere in the middle, and they'll be able to contain what they need to for the most part.
I'd be willing to wager that a better than average running team against a better than average running defense will produce about the NFL average in rushing average. So I would anticipate somewhere right around 4 yards per carry. I agree with you. I don't think either Denver back gets to that 100-yard mark. Let's talk a little bit about Jimmy G versus the linebackers. This is, weakness versus weakness, so to speak. Josie Jewell and Jonas Griffith have struggled against tight ends. George Kittle looking like he's going to be back, returning from injury this week. Jimmy typically struggles against linebackers. Who are you giving the initial advantage to here? San Francisco and Jimmy Garoppolo going against those linebackers, or Denver's linebackers picking off Jimmy G?
If he can, if the middle of the field is open, he eats the middle of the field up. That's just Jimmy G's thing.
Just forte.
But you have to be able to run the football, and you have to take shots. And he was taking shots last game, which whether they were successful or not, he took some shots downfield. The one to the touchdown to the tight end definitely was a deeper throw I think it was over 20 yards in the air. So, definitely a deep shot. It doesn't have to be 40, 50, 60 yards in the air. He tried to throw the ball downfield. So you're going to need more of those, and not the 5, 6, 7 yard deep and dunks right over the linebacker's head. I don't think, I'm not going to go as far as say, 2 interceptions for Jimmy G, but I wouldn't be surprised if he saw a linebacker like he normally does. But I think ultimately over the course of the game, you're looking at the advantage going to the Niners at that part. I think Kittle and Debo over the middle of the field, especially with Ayuk and Jennings, like all the weapons that we have, I think we're going to get the better of them. And if Surtain is injured for the game, that's even better for us in the passing game.
It is. That's the final question I have for you, because I'm in agreement that the Niners take advantage of that matchup. Debo versus Surtain, obviously not going to be the matchup all game long, but will be 1-to-1 on some plays. Surtain returning from a shoulder injury, if he does play, is he going to be willing to take on the Mack truck that is Debo attempting to run through that shoulder? Who has the advantage in your mind in that matchup?
I mean, will Debo even be lined up at wide receiver? I mean, we don't know. I think Surtain is one of the best corners in the league. But getting Debo in space, he's not going to like to take those hits. But football players, if they're in the game, they're in the game. Like, right, you can, you can't wear a sling on the shoulder as a defensive back because you got to get your hands up and that kind of stuff. It's not going to be like Dalvin Cook where he can just hammer that thing down and hold the football here. So, I think the matchup goes to the wide receivers at this point. But Surtain can be locked down. Surtain can be locked down if he's on his game. Whether it be Ayuk or whoever he's guarding on the outside. I mean, I don't expect him to follow Debo to the backfield. So,
right. I don't either.
But I think that he's definitely going to get some of his plays and beat our wide receivers from time to time. We'll see if Shanahan and his offensive mastermind, as we talked about earlier, can scheme them open to give them the highest chance of being successful.
Yeah, I see this as more of a wash, where Surtain will be able to guard those that are more traditional pass plays, but on those over the middle where Debo is set up for yak, Debo will plow through that tackle like nobody's business, and that shoulder won't feel any better. To your point, when he's lined up as a wide back, it won't be the matchup that we're looking at. I am very excited for this one. It feels like a bit more of a test for the 49ers. And then going forward, obviously, week 4 against LA. This feels like the schedule is ramping up. And the further, obviously, the horrible situation with Trey Lance is in the rear view, the less we have to focus on it, the more we can simply look at what remains this season, look at who is on the active roster, and get back to the conversation about what's happening on Sundays. And quite honestly, that's where I want to be, is talking about the players that are out there, not talking about what could have been, what should have been, who's at fault. It obviously has to be talked about, but I'm glad that we will be moving beyond it until we're right back at square one in the off season. So I'm excited.
This is my last diatribe on Trey Lance. I wish him health. And, like I said, I'm ultimately about the team whose logo's in the corner is the Niners.
Yes.
I'm fully going to be behind Jimmy G. I'm fully going to be behind the Niners. I want to see them win games. And ultimately, if Jimmy brings a ring to San Francisco, I'm going to be happy. Like, it's not going to matter who does it as long as it gets done. And and as far as in the chat or the, or whatever, now we only have one quarterback. There's no what ifs anymore. There's no, hey, we should put Trey in, or Trey should start all year. There's one quarterback. We're back to the days where the backups were Nick Mullins and CJ, Beathard. And no matter how good or bad Jimmy G plays, it's his team. And we run with him, and we run for the faithful. So.
Yes, we absolutely do. Jungle Karma coming in. Amen, Rando. Heartless Zhao, faithful. All right, we're ending on that positive note. Randon, absolutely pleasure having you here today. For the people watching, I want to say this is my favorite, to have a disagreement where Randon and I have two different opinions. As I said earlier, I don't think they're as far apart as some in the chat may have believed them to be, especially when Randon and I talk off air about it. We have a lot of common ground, but I just love the level of respect and having that dialogue where we do not agree on something, but we can still have a rational conversation. And it feels like if more people were able to do that and accept that you don't have to agree on everything, we could be in a better place as a fan base. And I admit that, hey, we're getting through some tough times, and everyone is entitled to let some emotion out at this point, because it is tough to go through. I feel for Trey Lance. I wanted him to be successful this year. I wanted this to be his team, his organization going forward, and it hasn't played out that way. We have to roll with the punches, have to root for the team. I appreciate the kind words. Raphael 562 Niners coming in. Great show, gentlemen. Heartless Zhao, great show today. Much appreciated. I know, Randon, you don't have the hockey pod tonight, but someone asked if you do have a YouTube channel. That's down below. Twitter, YouTube, the Hockey Podcast, all in the description of the video. I will be back on tomorrow with the Sneakerhead call-in program at 4 p.m. Randon and I will be back next week at 5 p.m., the usual time. Don't forget about sending in your submission for our design contest. We want to have those shirts ready when we are going to be in Atlanta. Looking forward to that, Randon.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. It'll be finally nice to share a beverage and talk some Niners in person and see a good game and hopefully a Niners dub in Atlanta.
Absolutely need that Niners dub. It is the most important thing. Bringing up all those comments, all the compliments, and God is one saying nice and friendly debate. Great show, fellas. Appreciate you recognizing that. We will be back. Until then, you know the drill. Cheers, faithful.